You're on. All right, John. Let's get this show on the road.
Wait a minute. My face shield. I'm getting my face shield together. My face shield. You know, I'm supposed to have a face shield. All right, I got a face shield. This is better than a mask, I'm told. Can you hear me? Because I can't breathe.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
No.
I can't breathe.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Oh, that's better?
Yeah,
But I don't have a face shield now. So, all right, take this off. Oh my goodness. My goodness. So, welcome chapter 288. Let's get going on this. Tonight's meeting, October 15th, 2020. Welcome to everybody in the chapter. This is our 7th virtual meeting, if you can believe that. It's been going on for 7 months now. This is the way we used to do it. I miss all you people. Used to do it at Keith's Hangar. Lots of us there. Believe it or not, that picture's almost 6 years old. Thanks to Wolfman for that. I really look forward to the day we can meet like this again and be all together and doing our socializing. But at least we do have the World Wide Web, and I guess we're reaching people in other states and possibly other countries. So we do have the ability to get together, but just not in person. Okay, I'd like to thank Doris Kennedy for her gift to the chapter. She gave a cash gift last Saturday in memory of Dennis and Bonnie Powell. Several of us gathered at the tree on Saturday during the virtual memorial service for Dennis and Bonnie. Matt brought over a large screen TV and set it up and somehow connected wizardry to the internet, so we were able to watch the broadcast or the virtual ceremony from the tree, gathered around with some of our friends, as you see in the picture here. Simulator's going really well. If you want to do some sim time, check with Jack Morey. He does a great job. It's running great. It's really a great resource. It's right next to Keith's Hangar. But you can check on the website how to get in touch with one of us instructors to use the sim. Young Eagles, Jim Clark is our Young Eagles coordinator. We don't have any events planned right now, large events, but Young Eagle flights are permitted. We had a request just the other day that Jim is working on from a person in the Spruce Creek community. They'd like to get there. I think it was their son wants to go for a Young Eagles ride. So individual flights are permitted. It's very easy to sign up now online. Works very well. If you have any questions, just contact Jim. In the Young Eagles vein, I'm going to show about a 4-minute video. It's called No Longer Fatherless, but you'll see about a minute to a minute and a half into the video, you'll see why this is important to us here in the chapter.
So many people are touched by this issue of fatherlessness. Every child has a hole in their soul in the shape of their father if their father is missing. How do we then begin to fill up the hole?
We're talking about filling that void begins with relationship, intimacy, giving back, pouring out to somebody that affectionate attention.
Only community and parents and teachers and clergy can fill that hole.
And that's why it's very, very important when we begin to be mentored in people's lives. It is not just the information that they want from us. It is often the relationship to say that I'm important, that I matter. You learn as you go. And I think sometimes we're so afraid that we're not going to do it right that we don't do it at all.
Hit it.
Sign up to be a mentor today.
The church can't do it all. School teachers can't do it all. Coaches can't do it all. Law enforcement can't do it all. It really takes a community to try to involve these young people and make a difference in their lives.
That'd be fun though.
It is. I mean, do you like roller coasters?
Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of like that today. It's kind of fun. Airplanes aren't noisy.
There's Mason.
Because what real fathers do is they make deposits in you through which you can make a withdrawal the rest of your life.
How can you be a man if you've never seen a man? You cannot go or have a goal if you don't know what that goal looks like. It's critical. These men that are out here giving their time, give these young men something different to see, something to be.
I think mentors do these simple things well. They say, They show up and they say, I'm with you. They model Christ and his integrity, his sincerity, and his humility. And then they also speak in with grace and truth, and they say, I believe in you, I'm proud of you.
There's a list of mentees, there's a list of kids who need that positive role model in their life.
No longer fatherless. Sign up today. Be a mentor. It's amazing. You can't beat the experience. The biggest thing is just showing up in these kids' lives. They're lacking that male figure in their life. They signed up for a reason too. It's mutually beneficial. You get to do so much fun stuff with them. Keeps you in the loop. It keeps you current with what's going on in their schools and their lives. It's just showing up. It's being there. It's going fishing, going surfing, finding things you like to do together, and just work on it. And it's a great thing. It's ongoing, and you're really making a positive impact in somebody's life, and it's a positive impact in your life as well. If you're not a mentor yet, sign up today. Mentors are always needed. All it takes is a background check and the ability to want to help somebody else out. No longer fatherless. Sign up today.
Because it's overwhelming.
Yes.
The support, you know?
Thank you so much.
That's great.
Okay, so as you can see, taking youth for an airplane ride, taking them to a football game, we make a difference in these youth's lives. And thank you. You know, Craig was the star of the show, but there were a lot of people there that day, other pilots, other ground volunteers, everyone in the chapter who supports Young Eagles. We are definitely supporting the youth, and that's what our mission should be. As you know, we've been featuring the virtual tour, or what we call is What's in Your Garage, What's in Your Toy Box. So I got a couple things for the toy box today. Number one, if you've had too much wine with dinner, or maybe you've been drinking too much this evening, if you think you're seeing double, well, not really, but close. You probably recognize the T-34 in the foreground. That's Greg Rhines. He had it down in the paint shop most of the summer and brought it home. Well, the one off to the side belongs to Tim Stevens. Very similar paint jobs. In fact, Tim stole Greg's idea. So, as it turns out, these airplanes are sisters. They're both T-34As, built in Canada by the Canadian Car Foundry in 1953. The serial numbers are only 7 numbers apart. So, 2 sister T-34s, painted almost identical, here in the creek now, in both chapter members. If you want to know who's who and you want to be able to tell them apart, the subtle differences are, this picture was taken from Greg's airplane. Greg's airplane has tip tanks, and Greg also, since his airplane had extensive service with the New Mexico Civil Air Patrol, Greg has the New Mexico cap emblem painted on the tail of his airplane. That's the 2 differences right there. Let's see if I can run this video. So what do you do when you have 2 sister airplanes and you're going to fly back to Spruce Creek together? Well, why not? Why not do a little formation? 2 sister airplanes, painted almost identical, just out there having a good time. So I'm sure you'll be seeing both these airplanes around in the future. I'm just waiting for them. If you looked at the Sport Aviation magazine, either online or the paper copy this month, you probably saw something in there called Starstruck. It's about a man named John Starr. He is, I guess calling him an artist is probably not worthy. He is a phenomenal artist, phenomenal aircraft painter. He's painted several airplanes, and he has a connection to at least 2 or 3 in here. So I wanted to show you this one. This is good old Rick Weiss. John Starr painted Rick's RV-7, and an interesting story that Rick thought he might have his airplane vinyl wrapped, and John Starr changed his mind. And what a great paint job John did. But again, this is in the magazine. John has painted or had something to do with at least 3 airplanes here in the chapter. He's from Oregon, but I believe he's moving to Florida later on, as soon as he can. So he'll be around. Great, incredible artist. Just incredible the work that he does. Oh, gee whiz. Did I tell you about the silent auction? Well, here I am talking about the silent auction again. Case of oil, there's my number. Some shelf brackets if you want to make your own workbenches and shelves. So there's my number. Please send me a text. That's why I said earlier, don't turn your cell phones completely off. Bids close Sunday at midnight. My contact info. Tonight's presenter is Norman Howell. He's a flight test engineer for Boeing, amongst other things. His resume is extensive. It's on the screen there. But I will say this, one of the things I found most interesting about Norman, he was the first one to fly an SR-20. First pilot to ever fly a Cirrus SR-20, and among other things. He flies the KC-47, the 787, C-17. He's a graduate of Embry-Riddle engineering test pilot. His presentation is going to be about a new airspeed that he calls, we have VY and VX, he calls it VZ, most efficient climb speed. So I'm going to turn it over to Norman at this time. I'm sure he'll introduce himself briefly.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the presentation tonight. I'm Norman Howell. I'm sure that John has already introduced me, so we'll skip right on to the title of my presentation. This is called Introducing VZ, Best Efficiency of Climb for Small Airplanes. I did this as an Embry-Riddle project for Capstone back in 2012, and I'm pleased to present it to you tonight. So here's the issue I wanted to look at with this project, and it's a better use of resources by general aviation. The idea here, of course, is that efficient use of resources in all forms of transportation is a priority, and for the reasons that you see listed there, cost savings primarily, and that general aviation, as a rule, hasn't been a big adopter of efficiency improvements. Really, there's not as much of a concern. We really don't use that much petroleum. This market's real small, and there's pretty high regulatory burden, so there's some roadblocks to efficiency. But there are some more efficient airplanes engines that are being worked on at this time. A couple of them, the diesel engines that you're seeing coming out of airplanes like the Diamond Twin Star. That's a compression ignition or a diesel engine. The interesting thing on the engines for this particular airplane, they're about 170 horsepower, so they're kind of heavy. As you can see, they're quite a bit heavier than an 0360. But the real deal on these, of course, is the specific fuel consumption, 0.38, and that's pounds per horsepower hours, the units. And it's pretty good compared to a gasoline engine, which is about a 0.48, and they can even be higher than that, 0.55 or so. Turboprop engines can be more like 0.6 and higher. So these diesels are very frugal. They have real good range, and the jet fuel, of course, and if you bought that, is a little bit less expensive than aviation gasoline. So that's a real efficient engine. And there's some other really neat things coming down the pike. Electric engines for airplanes. Will be fielded in the future, but there are many ongoing efforts to test right now. This picture here is the Magna XE Caravan. It just flew a few months ago, and that is at Moses Lake, Washington, is the airport there in the background. The neat thing about these electric motors is that they have a very high conversion efficiency for the engine. So the amount of energy you're carrying, about 80% of it gets converted into power, at least coming out of the electric motor. But the real deal, of course, is that the batteries are still really heavy for the amount of electricity they hold. If you wanted to put a comparison, a gallon of gasoline has about 34 kilowatts of electricity if you do a direct comparison. But batteries that can hold 34 kilowatts of power are about 60 to 80 or 100 pounds or more, so it's like 100 pounds a gallon. Of course, you get real good conversion efficiency, but the range is not quite there yet. We're going to see some big improvements on that because the audio industry is extremely competitive, and they're really driving to get the battery energy density up and the weights down, and we're seeing some neat changes in that. So range is still an issue, of course. They'll eventually get that. But regardless of the propulsion engine type, you still have an engine providing torque into a propeller and providing thrust and power to an airframe. And you really need to be efficient to be able to fly these efficient airplanes, efficient pilots. And there's some flying and flight planning techniques that you can get better efficiency out of your airplanes in the future, and you can do it right now in your own airplane. It doesn't cost you anything. And here we go. Here's how you do it. So first of all, when you're talking about efficiency, what is that? People tend to think that efficiency is miles per gallon. They really only look at the fuel side, but there's more to it than that. Is speed a factor? That is the question. And you fly max range, max endurance. Where's the balance there? So there was a great paper that was done by Gabriele and von Karman back in the 50s. It's called "What Price Speed." This little graphic here is from that paper. The bottom line for this is that speed has value. So speed has value because of value of time. So we actually put a value on speed, just like fuel. And so efficiency, as opposed to sustainability, efficiency is an optimum trade-off between the speed you get and the fuel that you use. So like many engineering things, there are trade-offs there. So that's what efficiency really is. And using those concepts, a fellow named B.H. Carson published a paper in 1980 called Fuel Efficiency of Small Aircraft. And this is an AIAA paper. If you look at the chart here, a lot of you folks have seen this. The upper one is a power versus speed chart, maximum endurance at the bottom of the curve, and maximum range where the curve touches the line coming from the origin. So maximum endurance, maximum range. Now, if you change the y-axis a little bit here and put that into thrust instead of power, you can do a very similar sort of graphical determination there. Maximum endurance is still at the same speed. Maximum range now actually comes at the bottom of the curve, as you can see. And that tangent line is now called the optimum cruise. And that was called Carson's speed. There's another look at it here in a little bit larger view. And these numbers will be relevant a little bit later. Again, you have the drag of the thrust there. It's not power on the y-axis, it's thrust as a force, and then your speed. Best rate of climb, roughly, maximum range there, 95 knots or so, and then the Carson speed there, again, is about 123, 124 knots or so. Again, that tangent line goes down to the origin. It's not shown on the graph here because we wanted to zoom in a little bit. So Carson's speed is basically the instantaneous airspeed where the product of your velocity and your miles per gallon are maximized. So again, these are trade-offs. As speed goes up, miles per gallon goes down eventually, and at least on the front side of the power curve there. And if you maximize that expression there, speed times miles per gallon, that's Carson's speed. And he called it the least wasteful way of wasting fuel. And there's some other interesting relationships if you do this mathematically. Sorry, have to do it. When you raise a value to an exponent, there's some interesting things that can go on here. So if you v to the -1, which would be maximizing the miles per gallon divided by velocity, if you maximize that, then that's your maximum endurance speed. If you maximize v to the 0, which is 1, which is maximized miles per gallon, that's maximum range, obviously. And kind of close to vy, which is your best rate of climb, roughly. It's kind of rough. Carson's speed is about 1.3 times your vy speed, roughly. Again, that's v to the 1, or v times miles per gallon. You maximize that. If you maximize the product of velocity squared versus miles per gallon, basically that's as fast as you can go because that square term is very powerful mathematically. So those are the relationships there for those of you who like to see that. But guess what? Most of you probably have never even heard of Carson's speed. And the reason for this is even though this paper was published in 1980, this concept really hasn't caught on. A few people talk about it from in some of the various forums. But the real issue here is that when you cruise at this speed, you're only using about maybe 50 to 55% of the power in the airplane. And the winds can overwhelm that for long cross country planning, and your specific fuel consumption. Remember, I talked about that earlier. For regular spark ignition piston engines, as opposed to compression engine, that's a diesel, are a little bit lower when you're around 65% power. So if you're looking at for good specific fuel consumption, again in a no-wind scenario, about 65% power is actually where your best specific fuel consumption comes in. And of course, people will say, I didn't buy a Bonanza or a Cirrus or a Mooney or build an RV or an SX300 or Easy Type to go slow. So this really hasn't caught on all that much in the community. So maybe Carson's speed for cruise isn't the greatest measure of efficiency, and we would want to look at this little exponent thing, this v to the 1 by mpg. If you maximize that, you get basically lower than desired cruise power because it doesn't work well in the real world. So the CAFE Foundation, the Comparative Aircraft Flight Efficiency Foundation, if you recall, that was formed in the early 1980s by Dr. Brian Seeley out in California. They ran a whole series of efficiency air races and did a bunch of other flight research. And they spent a long time thinking about this efficiency issue. And they came up with a different exponent for this velocity term, basically that put a little bit more emphasis on speed. There's a real long derivation of it. I won't bother you with it, but the part of this is analytical, part empirical. And any rate, so here it is. So the CAFE parameter, when you're looking at an efficiency of an airplane, the number you want to maximize is your velocity made good, and you raise that to the 1.3 power times miles per gallon. So this is like the measurand. This is the measurand of efficiency. If you can maximize your CAFE parameter, that's your best efficiency. And the reason you use velocity made good is that's the actual speed that you get between your departure and your destination, because that's really what it counts, is point to point. Instantaneous velocity is nice for theoretical people, but we're flying airplanes to go from point A to point B a lot of times, and so velocity made good is a better term here, and it allows you to evaluate a flight for non-constant true airspeed, and it also allows you to evaluate a flight for winds. Because as I said before, flight planning for your cruise has a huge impact on the overall efficiency of your flight. So Carson's speed still has merit, though, but not really as much as a cruise speed. My idea to come up with this for my master's thesis started from this book here, Logic of Flight by Jack Norris. He talked a lot about cruising at Carson speed, and again, we've shown that that's maybe a little bit too slow. He also talked a little bit about climbing at Carson speed, but he said basically climb until the airplane won't climb anymore. And he also didn't discuss really any considerations for cross-country planning with respect to winds. And there's all that really needs to get into the thought process. So when you're flying at Carson speed, you're using about 50 to 55% power for moving forward, as I said before, but then you use all the rest of your power for climb. And you don't want to fly this 25 squared thing. People get taught about that. I'm going to show you later on that just really is hard. It hurts your efficiency, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. So, rather than climbing until the airplane doesn't climb anymore, what I thought I would do is put a performance limit on there and actually make this climb a profile instead of just a constant speed. And this is similar to what we see in some of the larger airplanes. And the nice thing about changing your profile when the airplane reaches a climb performance limit is that the airplane tells you when you need to make a little change in your climb profile. You don't have to do any computations for different weights, or if it's hot or cold, or if you have winds or any of that sort of thing. That's different from what Norris did, and added quite a bit to the definition. So as you recall from your training, there's a couple of FAA-defined V-speeds. A VX, of course, is the best angle of climb, and that's the best climb that you get when you're flying your airplane to go forward. And VY is best rate of climb. That's the best climb per unit time. So time, distance based for the first one, time based on for the second one. So now, logically, we would go to VZ. VZ is currently an unassigned term in FAA vernacular, and so I claimed it in this paper in order to represent the best efficiency of climb. So it's a climb profile. It's not really a constant speed, and here's how you do it. VZ is about 1.3 times your VY at your maximum continuous rated power. No 25 square, as much as you can get out of the airplane in its certification basis, that's what you use. And now here's where the performance limit comes in. You climb at this speed until the airplane will not climb any faster than 500 feet per minute. So then you change from a constant speed climb to a constant vertical velocity climb. So you maintain 500 feet per minute climb. While you're doing that, the speed's going to slowly decrease a little bit. And then when the speed gets to whatever your VY speed would be for that altitude, then you just maintain your VY and climb at that. So it's a profile instead of a constant speed. And here's how you manage the power for your normally aspirated engines. You use the target EGT method of mixture management for most efficient operation. In a nutshell, you take off sea level full rich, and then around 2,000-3,000 feet or so, and every 1,000 feet thereafter, you lean the mixture a little bit in order to go back to the same EGT that you see on a sea level standard day, and that way you lean just a little bit and climb. If you search on that term, target EGT mixture management, you'll find a number of good presentations on that. But that's how you get the most efficient operation. So that's VZ. And again, it was unassigned, and it's actually easy to visualize here. This is from the FAA Flying Handbook. VX, VY, and then VZ. And then you'll see in the profile there, the reason that line is bent is ordinarily you'd maintain your best rate of climb till you're departing the traffic pattern. Then you pick up your 1.3 times your best rate of climb. And then that little kink there is when the airplane can't climb any faster than 500 feet per minute. And then you've gone to a VVI climb there. So that's the profile. But it doesn't really make any difference there. There has to be three things that have to work for this to actually be a useful term. One of them is technically rigorous, so it really is the most efficient climb and use the CAFE parameter that I talked about before to evaluate that climb. And then can you define this climb in regulatory language? And then can it really be flown by ordinary pilots? The idea for this is you would introduce VZ in flight training at the time that you're going to get your complex or high performance endorsement for a private pilot license. So the difficulty of this particular maneuver has to aim at that population. So that's the idea there. So we need to satisfy all three of these things for this to actually be a viable concept. And when I was working on this project, this was where I really ran into some problems, because it'd be nice to have a computer model or simulation of airplane performance that could account for this profile change. And the more I looked into it, the more discouraged I got, because it was a very difficult modeling problem. Charts don't really work. Even some spreadsheets that I'd seen didn't really account very well for propeller performance and efficiency. And then I discovered this program here called Benchmark. And this is Benchmark. This is a screenshot of the program. This is an extraordinary performance flight test and performance program. Really basically made the entire project possible. On the left side, you'll see the airplane and then the engine. There are computer models for those there that are unlike anything else that exists. The propeller models is on the left-hand side. When you run those, it's basically a 3D computer rendering of the entire Boeing General Propeller chart that was developed in the 1940s. There's all your instruments going down the left side there. Flight test results you would put in, and then the three charts at the bottom are the results. This is our Mooney 201, and hopefully you'll be seeing this at the creek here pretty quick with a new paint job. and this airplane was modeled in Benchmark in order to do the initial portions of this research. So Benchmark was written by Alfred Scott. He's the president of Sequoia Aircraft Company, the guys that came up with the Falco airplane, as well as the Sequoia, which was a kit built similar to the Falco. A couple of consultants on this program, Finn and Dorothy Taylor, are legendary in flight test circles. They were the primary flight leads on Mooney, working with Roy Lopresti back in the 70s, doing flight tests. Huge history. They're giants in the industry. And then James Petty was the mathematician that came up with the Petty power equation that could model these piston engine power. And you're going to see all that's really neat. So Benchmark was started in '86 basically to overcome these engine and propeller modeling problems, because there was all kinds of issues on that. And this is where you can get it. secair.com/benchmark is the home page. Secair is the home page for Sequoia Aircraft. And then also you can get this for free on the Mac App Store. It's called Sequoia Benchmark. On the App Store, this is what it looks like, Sequoia Benchmark. There's all kinds of information here for it. It's a free download. Only works on a Mac OS, and the reason I have a Mac now is because of this program. This is the page at secair.com, and there's a whole bunch of articles about performance flight testing. There's a link to the paper that I wrote for this project, and a whole bunch of help and documentation for how you run the program. Really, really neat. Completely fascinating, especially if you're a gearhead. And some of the airplanes, engines, and propellers that have been modeled are already here, so you can just grab one and download it if you don't want to try and model something yourself. So you'll see all the lists of various engines that are all there, and propellers as well. And a bunch more propellers. There's some Mooney ones. I did all these models that had that talk about Mooney that are in here. And there's a really, really old manual that has a bunch of information on how the program was developed. It's for an early Mac, but it still has a lot of relevant information there. It's available on download at the bottom. Now, the interesting thing is that you don't have to do flight tests for an airplane that's already been tested and certificated to model it in Benchmark. What I did is used the Pilot Operating Handbook cruise data, and there was a lot of it for the Mooney 201 in order to model a Mooney 201 in Benchmark. And Mooney is reasonably equivalent to an RV series airplane for performance. So when you look at the numbers here for Mooney, they sort of would map over to RV roughly in terms of performance and results, that sort of thing. So here's all these numbers, and people will normally don't look at all this, but I grabbed all of them. In fact, the entire Pilot Operating Handbook, every line of data I put into Benchmark, and all those little pluses are a line from the POH that have been put into Benchmark, and then result in a drag and lift curve that you can use in order to predict performance. So at any rate, that's what that is. The line there kind of is the best fit to the data, and that was a lot of work. So this is the nifty thing now. We have an engine chart here, and everybody says, oh, I hate charts. But basically, you can fly the charts just like you fly an airplane here. And I'm going to demonstrate that. On the left-hand side, basically, is your manifold pressure. On the right-hand side is your RPM. And you can fly this and look at how much horsepower you will get from your model and all the results from flying this. And here we go. Okay, there's the pressure, altitude, and the temperature down there, and there's how much power you have. Okay, now I'm going to climb. Full throttle climb. And I get up to about 3,000 feet at full throttle, 2,700 RPM. And because of the atmosphere and the temperature, you'll see in the upper left, I'm now down to about 180 horsepower. So as you climb, the atmosphere gets a little bit less dense. It gets a little bit colder, but you start to lose power because of your maximum manifold pressure. So here at 3,000 feet, wide open throttle, the most you can get is about 27 inches of manifold pressure. Still at 2,700 RPM. So left side manifold pressure, right side RPM, and you can fly the chart just like you fly the engine. And now we're going to roll straight down into the propeller. So the engine makes torque or horsepower, and in the case of climbing at 3,000 feet there, your 200 horsepower engine's only making 180 horsepower at wide open throttle and 2,700 RPM. Where the cursor's pointing here is that power. That's the input power into the propeller. But the propellers aren't 100% efficient. There's an incredible amount of data and mathematics and surface modeling. Basically, you have a huge three-dimensional surface which defines how a propeller reacts to both its the power that's going into it and the speed at which it's rotating through the air. This was about three decades worth of work that was accomplished in huge wind tunnels. All this is now mathematically modeled, and you can fly this particular chart just like you're flying an airplane as well. And so let's see if I can make that run. There you go. 180 horsepower into the prop. I'm at 3,000 feet. Got 2,700 RPM, and the prop's only about 76% efficient here. So 180 horsepower in, you only get 136 out. Now watch what happens when I do nothing else but climb at a faster speed. That 86 knots there was the best rate of climb for a Mooney, and I go to about 1.3 times that, now 113 knots. I didn't change anything else, but I'm a little bit more efficient on a propeller now. Okay, so now I've got 149 horsepower coming out of that prop. It's not being wasted because the efficiency is a little bit better. And you think, well, why can't I climb faster? It's because the drag is actually going up a little bit faster than the horsepower in this particular case. So it's not the best rate of climb, but you've gained back a little bit of horsepower. So the loss in climb performance here isn't nearly what you think. And this right here was the key to making understanding how this VZ was going to work. The first time I was playing with this model and I started modeling the propeller efficiency, I ran the speed up using the controls, and I just about fell off my chair. I couldn't believe what I was seeing there. And then the flight test was backing it up. So this is another thing that I saw is that 25 square destroys your climb performance, and I'm going to show you exactly why here. Here we are again. Here's your engine. Manifold pressure on the left, RPM on the right, and now you're one of these guys that has to go to 25 square right off the bat. So we're going to watch and see what happens there. I don't want full throttle. I click it off at the bottom. All right, now I just pull the manifold pressure back to 25 inches or so, and I've gone from a 200 horsepower airplane to about 160 horsepower. And now I roll the RPM off to 2,500 as well because I'm a 25 square guy. And now my 200 horsepower airplane is making 144 horsepower. Now as I climb, it gets a little bit colder. The manifold pressure stays constant instead of coming back like it does at wide open throttle. I got about 148 horsepower. So before I was climbing at 3,000 feet, I had 180 horsepower going into the prop. Here I've only got 148. Now let's see what happens when you go to fly the prop. Okay, here is the prop now. Again, this is modeled from a Mooney. It's a Macaulay two-blade propeller. You can see where the cursor is pointing there in the lower right. That's your 148 horsepower going in, and I'm climbing at best rate of climb. That's 108. That's 86 knots, indicated airspeed. And now we're going to see what happens here. At 3,000 feet, there's 2,500 RPM. Yeah, about 77% efficiency on the prop, but they're at 86 knots. There's a percentage. And you see now my 200 horsepower motor is only putting 115 horsepower in the prop. If I increase to the VZ profile there, 113 knots, I get a little bit more power. It's 125 or so, but it's not 150. And so and that's what the guys are seeing going climbing out at the higher speed with full power. So again, 200 horsepower airplane. You're at 3,000 feet climbing. If you're wide open at 2,700 and you're flying a VZ profile, again here for the Mooney, 113 knots calibrated, you're getting 149 horsepower out of the prop. If you're a 25 square guy and you're slowed way down at your VY trying to climb, you're only getting 115 out. If you speed up a little bit, you're getting about 125 horsepower out, but your rate of climb isn't very good here because, again, you use about 50 to 55% power to move the airplane forward, and at 113 knots. And in this case, this would be about 110 to go forward, so you're only climbing with about 15 horsepower. So anyway, so basically 25 square, your low altitude climb performance, it just destroys that. And I would advocate, if the airplane certification basis allows, use full power for climb. And if you have trouble with overheating, then you should look at your cooling baffles and how you manipulate your cow flaps if you got those. At VZ, you shouldn't have any real issues as much cooling because you're quite a bit faster than the certified limit. For the experimental guys, you may have to work a little bit. Hopefully you don't see overheating, but this is kind of where you want to go. So let's look at this. Let's see what this power does and into climb performance. And now we're going to look at a chart that Benchmark produces called a climb polar. A lot of people may not have seen this before, but it is in your pilot operating handbooks if you have a certified airplane. I'll show you that here in a second. So this is the climb polar. This is an interesting chart: time, distance, and fuel used to climb. And when you see that there, the bottom is either time, distance, or fuel used. The y-axis there on the left is altitude. And if you look where this little blue plus is in the line there on that big curve, that's the target altitude there. That's showing 8,000 feet. There's some mini charts here. So this airplane right now, this is a best rated climb speed, full power, and a Mooney. If you were at best rated climb speed, or actually a little bit faster here, at 8,000 feet, you can expect to be climbing about 600 feet per minute. And this particular data would be discernible from the pilot operating handbook, but it only gives you this one speed. It doesn't let you really change any of the other parameters. This is a close-up of the time to climb chart. Again, 10 minutes to 8,000 feet, and your rate of climb getting up there, when you get there, it's about 600 feet per minute, so you're still climbing a little bit there. The lower curve there is the at maximum gross weight, and the upper curve there was when you're lighter. You can obviously climb faster, so it's a little bit different curve, and all your different weights kind of lie in between there in that blue arc. Now, I was curious how accurate Benchmark was with respect to the published data for the Mooney. So what I did is I superimposed this chart at the same scale to the chart that's in the Mooney Pilot Operating Handbook. And as you can see, it's almost an exact match. If you can see underneath there the chart that is the chart from the Pilot Operating Handbook, it starts to diverge a little bit above 13,000 at gross weight. And the line for Mooney there, from the book, is 2,300 pounds, the upper one, and then the big line that goes above that's 2,200. So you can kind of see where those would fan out. This tells me that the benchmark was pretty darn accurate and does match the published data for that model. But the cool thing about a model versus a chart is then you can manipulate it just like we were flying the engine and the propeller earlier. So that's what we're going to do now. And this is the big question. If I increase my speed from 83 or 86 knots, again, VY in this Mooney, and go faster, what altitude am I going to be at on a standard day at gross weight when I have to go to 500 feet per minute? So that's the prediction. Faster speed, 500 foot per minute climb. And where does that happen? And this program just makes it easy as can be. So there's the speed. I'm at 8,000 feet, climbing about 600 feet a minute. And now here I am. I'm going to nose over and fly faster. Let's go up to 113 knots there. That's the VZ speed. Okay. And then we'll put that in there. This is a really huge calculation, so we smooth it out after we make these changes. So I'm a little bit low on the VVI, so I should lower my altitude here to predict where I'm going to transition from climbing at 113 knots to climbing at 500 feet per minute. And in this case, you can see it's right around 6,000 feet or so. It's when I do this transition. So that's a big deal there. And again, you think about constant airspeed climb, then a constant VVI climb when you see 500 feet per minute. Now, the neat thing about this is I don't have to do any flight tests for the calculations in order to prove that I have the efficiency from this profile, because I can do this by model. And I can run all kinds of predictions with this model just by manipulating these charts. This particular capability, what you see right here, never existed before this project. No one had ever done it before. In fact, it wasn't even in benchmark, and I worked extensively with Alfred Scott to develop this capability in this program, and it's really cool. So basically then what I could do is I can figure out time, distance, and fuel using a profile using this model, and then start looking at baselines and then see how sensitive this, get a prediction on how sensitive this technique might be for actual pilots to fly. So you run the profiles, figure out how far you go, how fast you got there, and how much gas you used, and then use that to compute the CAFE parameter. And this little chart here, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but this is really important. I knew once I ran these numbers that this thing was going to be good. It really is the most efficient profile. I showed it in the model, and that was the first check mark in whether or not VZ was actually useful. The top line there, you can see VZ speed was the speed and went to 8,000 feet, actually the profile. We used target EGT to manage the mixture. It took from near sea level to 8,000 feet. Actually, this is a model 0 to 8,000 foot climb. So standard day, gross weight, Mooney, 0 to 8,000 feet. It takes 12.8 minutes to get to 8,000 feet. You go 25.5 miles downrange. You use 3.4 gallons of gas to use it. There's your nautical miles per gallon. And then remember, CAFE parameter is the velocity made good times the MPG, in this case nautical miles per gallon. So that's the score, 38.21. Now, if you follow the POH, you fly at VY at full rich. Take you 10 minutes. Remember that? We saw that. 10 minutes to get up there, 2.7 gallons, and you go downrange 14 miles. Okay, but you're only 14 miles, so you need to get back to the same point in the sky as the VZ climb. So now you just cruise down there. And remember, with this the second line there, you're actually maximizing the amount of time. You're at 65% cruise, and you would think that would maximize the CAFE score, but it doesn't, because the climb is such a powerful contributor. So you can see that lower score there, full rich, and we're going to start getting progressively more efficient there. Climb at VY again, full rich, and 65 cruise, best power. Actually, that's the VY is the POH. That first one is the POH number, and then I ran the prediction with benchmark on the second VY. Then I ran a very, very close correlation. Ran the VY at full rich, and then did a best economy versus the best power cruise, again from the POH model that. And then the last one is a 25 degrees lean of peak cruise there at for climb. And then the second last one. The last one there is climb at VY, target EGT, so you're managing the mixture on the climb up. When you level off, you go to a 65% cruise and go to lean of peak. That's about as good as you can do without flying fast. You see the numbers have come up there. It's about 3,300 on the score versus 3,100. Not a big change. And then for fun, the last one is I ran the numbers at about 1.15 VY. This is the number that Eckelbar, the fellow that wrote Flying Beechcrafts and Bonanzas, a lot of you people may be familiar with his works. That's what he advocated. And you can see that speed there really makes a difference there, because the score is about 37.64. Not quite as good as Flying VZ at about 1.3 VY, but it's real close. And so what that immediately shows is that the technique is a little bit less sensitive to speed. So you don't have to nail the speed. And in fact, if you happen to fly that speed pretty close to what you would expect a student who is getting its complex rating to fly to, which would be plus 10 and minus 5 knots, that's in the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards. So you're going to fly to that. Even plus 10 or minus 5, you'll still get the results that you're looking for. So that really is neat, because now it can be a regulatory, it can be acceptable in a regulatory sense, because you can still get really good results and still apply it to that pilot population. but the next real question is this profile really flyable? You don't want golden hand test pilots to be the only ones to be able to fly this thing. I mean, it's got to be flown by a private pilot that's going for a complex or high performance rating. So the idea here is, once I got all the models done and the regulatory stuff, is actually go do a flight test, and the flight test would anecdotally gather some performance data, but the real thing is more of a flying qualities evaluation. Is that and workload, is this really flyable by an ordinary pilot with ordinary skill? The Cooper-Harper rating scale, there is a flight test device used. Actually, it's a practice used to evaluate flying qualities. And in a nutshell, what you do is you have a task, and you have, if you're really good at it, you can meet a desired criteria for performance or accomplishment of the task. And then if you're adequate, that means it's kind of hard to do, but guys can do it. And then if it's completely unsatisfactory, it's you can't do it at all, and those are the lower scores. So a 1 is the almost impossible good rating scale. A 3 is pretty good. When you get to 4 to 6, it's not quite so great. But the adequate criterion basically is, can you maintain your speed plus 10 and minus 5 knots when you're flying your VZ profile? And that points exactly to the airman certification standards. So is that flyable? Can you maintain that speed? So here's the work card here that was done, a test card that was done for the flight test. This is in the Mooney 201. All the setups are there. Again, in this particular case, the Mooney-specific VZ profile is maintain wide open throttle and 2,700 RPM and accelerate to 115 indicated, which is 113 CAS in the airplane. There's about a 2-knot position error. So look at 115 knots and then climb to 8,000, maintain that speed. There's your target EGT about every 1,000 feet. You lean there if you look at the line, and then use your cowl flaps if the cylinder head temperature is above 380, so you can kind of modulate those. And then once the climb drops to 500, you maintain 500 until VY, then maintain VY. And we already know from the prediction on a gross weight standard day Mooney that it's going to be a little bit above 6,000 or so when you start to see the climb performance drop to 500 feet per minute. And in this case, the airplane is lighter. We had a headwind, but it was hotter. Who cares? You don't have to do any math at all. The airplane will tell you when it's performance limited, so all you have to do is wait till you see that 500 foot per minute on average and then go to that. So you don't have to do any computations. The airplane tells you how it wants you to fly it. So and we went up to 8,000 feet, and we took some data there. And again, for the really good performance, I wanted the pilot to be able to maintain his speed during the Z portion, the earlier portion, within 5 knots. But that's outside the parameters of the airman certification standards. So the adequate performance is at plus 10, minus 5. At the time this test was written, it was still the practical test standards, but the numbers are still the same. Okay, and then the alternate task is just do a straight baseline VY climb and then record the comments how hard this thing is to do. Okay, and these are the test results. This is actually using Google Earth. And what you're seeing there is the 2 climbs superimposed on one another. One of them is a VY climb and one's VZ. This is coming from Wichita, Jabara Airport northbound. There's a real strong headwind there. It was kind of hot, and the airplane was a little bit lighter, so you'll see a change in the CAFE scores. But I want you to now see, this is kind of a visualization of what this looks like. So there's the takeoff, and the purple track is the is the VY climb, and the white track is the Z. And you actually see it. You'll see it labeled there. So the upper one that's the climb path, climbing at VY, and the little dotted dots below, that's where the VZ path was. So he flew the same path on the same day with about the same weight. And there you can see the VZ climb. Now the airplane on this test day reached its 8,000 feet, about 12 miles from takeoff. And then you cruise in here using the VZ profile. You actually got to 8,000 feet, 19 miles away instead. So that's basically how fast and how much gas did it take you to get to this same point in the sky? and that was what the evaluation was from the performance. Again, that was as a sideline. I wanted to find out how hard this thing was to fly. So this video here is the test subject flying along, and we're just past about 6,500 feet. The rate of climb has just dropped to 500, so we're at the transition point from the speed to the VVI. And he's managing his cowl flaps there, and looking at his EGT for target EGT. And I was asking him, was this a difficult thing to do? And he didn't seem to think it was. You'll see the airspeed's now starting to decrease a little bit, so he's flying this constant 500 foot per minute climb. He's got another 1,000 feet to go. So we got through the profile change. You can see there's the target EGT at about 1,300. And we're climbing out. There you'll see on that Garmin 530 the path, so we could repeat the two paths and get that visualization on Google Earth that you saw earlier. Okay, so the pilot gave this a Cooper Harper score of 3. A little bit, he was able to maintain desired performance. He could keep the airplane within 5 knots while flying this profile. So that tells me that it wasn't too difficult. We did run the numbers here. If you look at that, you'll see those CAFE numbers a little bit lower, primarily because of the headwind that we're climbing into. But when you look at that, the real interesting thing is it took about the same amount of gas to get to that 19-mile point, but using VZ you got there at 95 knots. Velocity made good with the winds, and VY about 76. So same point in the sky, same gas, 20 knots faster. I call that a win. The results are promising. We had have had I got ratings of 3 from 3 different pilots flying 3 different types of Moonies, and I used this technique personally in our Moonie and the Aerostar 601P. I actually rated it as a 2 in the Aerostar because the airplane's so easy to manage from a power standpoint. And a lot of the comments I got from the pilots was that it's really no harder to fly than a VY climb. It's really easy to seed with transition to vertical velocity when the performance drops down. I was a little worried about that, and they said it was really easy to see. And of course, less rudder needed on the climb out for side wash, that sort of thing. So people seem to like that. So here is a flight that I conducted recently with Matt Dunkel, one of our neighbors, in his beautiful RV-10. We're up at Palatka Airport, and again, the idea here was to do a VY climb and a VZ climb in his airplane and kind of take a look at some of the performance differences and how easy it was to fly. So this is a profile, or actually a flight recording from a program called Cloud Ahoy. If you've never heard of this, I urge you to get it, and it's a fantastic program. And what you see here in the screen here is the flight path at the top portion, that big magenta triangle there. The little yellow arrows are the winds that were occurring that day. Normally when you do this test, you'd like to be 90 degrees out to the wind. I use another app called Windy, if you've ever heard of it, windy.com, to predict where the wind was going to be. We planned our flight, and then Cloud Ahoy will actually show you those exact winds because it keeps an atmospheric model of the wind for several years anyway on your flights, and so that you can actually see how good your wind prediction was. You can see there on the climb out we're exactly 90 degrees to the wind with those little barbs. You see a little airplane there on its climb, and that's where we were. We used ForeFlight to capture this data along with a Sentry ADS-B GPS and capture the flight. On the bottom there you see 3 charts. One of them is an altitude versus indicated airspeed. There's a little bit of an anomaly there, which I think may have either been a wind shear or possibly a GPS tracking issue. And that's the blue line, which is the speed. But you can see the scale's kind of big there. It's only 100 to 90 knots for the whole thing, so that's 10 knots. In the last half of the flight there, you can see that Matt was doing a great job holding his indicated airspeed. We wanted to hold 95 knots. That's a published VY for an RV-10. And he was able to hold it within a couple of knots there on VY. So well above the airman certification standards for a private pilot, but he's a JetBlue captain, so we expect that out of him. The middle chart there, of course, is the rate of climb over 3-minute period there. And that 1,137 foot per minute climb, that was basically the average over 3 minutes worth of climbing there, going up to close to 5,000, basically 1,500 feet to 5,000 feet. So that's pretty close to best rate of climb for an RV-10. And if you look there on the bottom right, you'll see a true airspeed. Of course, as indicated, airspeed stays constant when you climb. True airspeed goes up, and we'll see the results of that. We're going to do a little play here, I think, if I can get this to run. There she goes. So now you can actually play a flight at 4 or 10 times the speed. You see the little airplane tracking up. There's the vertical velocity changing. And as you climb, of course, at a constant indicated, the true airspeed will start to walk its way up. And at the top of the climb there, you can see he's still doing a really good job holding 95 knots. The true airspeed is now 105, so you're starting to get down a little bit and down the road. So that's a VY climb in Cloud Ahoy with an RV-10. And now this is what the VZ climb looks like. Obviously similar to what you saw with the Mooney, you get downrange a little bit faster. But the really good thing here, the interesting to look at, is the speed versus the performance trade-off. And again, part of the reason for that is the propeller efficiency is quite a bit better as you start to roll the speed up. So here you're seeing the VZ climb is now 125 knots. And the average speed for this entire 3-minute, average vertical speed there was 950 feet per minute climb. So you gave up maybe 200 foot per minute average climb in this first part of this climb segment. But man, look at this true airspeed. You give up very, very little to get that. Let me just roll this and we'll let her go here. So there, should get a play. Yeah, she goes. All right, now we're climbing there. You see the little airplane climbing. And again, the vertical velocity there, around 900 or so. But look at this true airspeed now. He's holding 125 indicated, and you're 135 knots going down the road there. Coming up to even higher than that, 136, 137. Very little loss in climb capability, and you're really getting down the road. So that was kind of neat to see in using Cloud Ahoy. I love this program. Everybody should have that. You could do all kinds of flight tests with this. Its potential really hasn't been fully explored. There's a whole magazine series you probably could write with this program for Phase 1 flight test. There's Gretchen, and there I am, and that's our Aerostar 601P, another airplane that I hope to have you see around the creek before too long. This is my Lancer Legacy or SX300 simulator for you the folks in the experimental world. It's got pretty good performance. This is a VZ climb from Cloud Ahoy. Typical what I do in this airplane. Its best rated climb is about 115 knots indicated, so VZ is 154. And I fly this a lot. I publish this on the Aerostar magazine and on the forum, and there are lots and lots of people in the Aerostar now that are using this climb profile. And because the airplane is turbo normalized, it really doesn't run out of climb performance quite as fast. You can get to a really long altitude, so a really long way down range as you climb to altitude. This airplane's a 601P. It's really happy at 19,000 feet, and so that's kind of the target altitude I use for flight planning and vary from there. So 154 knot climb, and then I go to an LOP cruise. The cruise numbers for this airplane, 26 inches, 2,200 RPM, 26 gallons an hour, total fuel flow, 25 degrees Lena peak, and about 215 knots or so, 210 to 215, depending on the temps. So we're just going to bring this up. But again, the astounding thing is this really high true airspeed, and it really picks up as you get to altitude in the turbo airplanes because the difference between indicated and true starts to become really stark. And it really pays off in these climbs using VZ for the higher performance. This is a screenshot of a typical climb in the Aerostar. Again, you can see on the Aspen there, upper left of the Aspen display, 154 knots. I've got that marked. We're passing 16,000. I'm headed south to California, I think, on this day. And you can see this vertical velocity about 800 feet per minute. So she's still climbing at a hold this pretty much all the way up. And again, you can get down the road. This is the AirVenture Cup air race from 2014. I wound up much higher than everybody else on the race. I think a few people listening to this probably were in that race. And there's a little bit of tailwind here. Now, this is an older flight, so the wind barbs are no longer available on Cloud Ahoy. So as you look at the charts there on the lower side, you'll see that the indicated airspeeds and the true airspeeds, which need the winds really to drive them, are not really accurate. This airplane won't go 275 knots in level flight. It's more like full power, about 250 knots or so. And I was trying to do a pretty good job holding the indicated there. You see the indicated showing higher as I let this play. But there she goes. All right, and so you can see the charts move there. That 160 indicated there is actually 150. Had a little bit of a tailwind climbing out, but that's not accounted for. That vertical velocity is accurate, and this ground speed is accurate. So you can see the ground speed picking up. And begin about 10 knots of tailwind. We're going to climb all the way up. Then I got up to altitude here, 19,000 feet or so. And those ground speeds, you level off. Here comes the ground speed as the airplane just stays at full race power. And again, the indicator is not quite that high. Vertical velocity, yep, staying level now on the middle chart. On the lower right chart, you'll see the ground speed there, about 265, 270 knots. It still wasn't enough to catch the SX-300s I could see slowly pulling away from me at low altitude. But it sure made a great fun race there. And a lot of fun on that. I encourage everybody to do the AVC if they haven't done it in the past. Great fun there. So VZ, it's the first step to efficient flight planning and execution. Doesn't matter what kind of an engine is turning the propeller. You have a propeller, you have an airplane, you have the air, and the relationships are all the same. So you have an efficient profile there, the VZ, as I talked about. And the next thing that you would go over, and it's a subject for another presentation, is what cruise altitude are you going to use? And you use your winds and your performance for the airplane to determine the highest CAFE parameter for the altitude you choose. And so people have asked me, well, do you change the VZ profile for the winds or any of that? It says, no, you always fly it the same. Doesn't matter what the temperature is. Doesn't matter what the weight of the airplane is. Doesn't matter the winds. What you do, the winds basically determine where you stop climbing and go to your cruise segment. And you can really get some efficiency out of the airplane if you get good at choosing those cruise altitudes based on the winds and what your airplane will do. Flight Plan's really good at this when you look at the detailed performance charts, but again, that's a subject for the next presentation. I recommended to Embry-Riddle that they do some more tests by test pilot schools, universities, and to basically validate this concept and the efficient flight planning concept. The eventuality I hope that will happen is that VZ will become a defined FAA speed, and that the efficient flight planning concepts will be added to the Airman's Information Manual and to the complex or high performance private pilot endorsement. That's where we'd really like to have this wind up. So again, the lessons learned here: efficiency in flight. It's a combination of speed and fuel economy in the right ratio. Hopefully you've taken away from this that your technique has a huge influence on how much efficiency you get out of your flight. There's better engines coming, and so the better that you can fly your propeller and fly your airplane, you'll be able to get the desired performances that you want. But you can practice right now. It doesn't cost you anything to do this. You can go fast, save gas, and have some fun. So what I say here is that better performance is available from your airplane right now for free. The only thing you need to do is STC your brain. Thank you very much for listening to this. I hope everybody really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you, Norm, for that great presentation. And for all of you out there, our next chapter meeting is going to be on November 20th. Please email your nominations for your 2021 Board of Directors. As always, the bar is open. You know, if you've been to these meetings before, we always open the bar. We always put the chairs away, and we always talk about cleanup at 0900 sharp on Friday morning. Well, I'm clowning around about that, but I do wish for those days that we can get back to getting together in person with an open bar and having a little bit of work to do. Thank you all. Have a good night. Fly safe.